the midpoint of the hypotenuse.
That's the side opposite the
That's the side opposite the 90-degree angle. The midpoint of the hypotenuse of a right triangle is equidistant from all three vertices. Now, what do you call this line segment? Let's put some points on here. What do you call segment AD if it's drawn from one vertex to the midpoint of the opposite side? No. Starts with an M. Median. It's the median. Okay? The median is drawn to the midpoint of the opposite side. So the median of a right triangle drawn to the hypotenuse cuts the hypotenuse in half, and it's equal to each one of those halves. Okay? Now I want you to take a look at the two triangles that have been created. Look at triangle ABD. What kind of triangle is that? It's an isosceles triangle, which means that angle DAB is congruent to angle DBA. Now look at triangle CAD. What is that? It's an isosceles triangle. So angle C is equal to this angle.
You could know what never mind.
Okay, now watch this, how neat.
Wait, times. Does the line, does that bisect 90 degrees, or is it just
No.
random?
No, it's just random. Doesn't bisect the 90-degree angle.
Because it's the midpoint.
Right. Okay? Now, knowing all this information, we could figure out, if we know this right here,
Sure.
this is a right triangle, and AD is the median,
Oh my God.
okay? If I gave you that angle B had a measure of 30 degrees,
You figure out the rest of that.
could you figure out all the other angles?
Yes.
All
You
of
can't figure out. Like,
Yeah, you can.
You can figure it all
All right, let's start with triangle CAB.
30.
No, CAB.
That's a 90
Oh,
degree.
right.
That would be
60, which means that the other one would be 60, which means the other one would be 60.
No.
I mean, no. Like, that would be 60. And then D would be 60. That's all I'm saying.
Okay.
And then down there's 30. And then there's 120. God.
You.
So if you know that you have a right triangle and the median is drawn to the hypotenuse, not a median drawn to one of the legs, to the hypotenuse, you know that these three things equal each other. And if you know one angle measure, you can find all the other angle measures in there. Because you've created two isosceles triangles. Cool, huh?
Yeah.
See, that's what's the thing about geometry.
It's
It's
evil.
like we learn all these crazy little things. Okay, here's two more, and then we're going to do the classroom exercises. If one angle of a parallelogram,
Can we make up a symbol for parallelogram?
yeah, you draw it, it's a parallelogram.
Try a small.
Oh, okay.
If one angle of a parallelogram is 90 degrees, then it's a rectangle. How could we say that?
Because if all the angles are equal and that one's 90 degrees, then that means they're all 90 degrees.
Okay, but we don't know they're all
And then-
equal yet. We know it's a parallelogram.
Because if the lines are parallel and one equals 90, then supplementary angles.
Because opposite angles in a parallelogram are congruent.
Yeah.
And consecutive angles are
supplementary.
supplementary. So if one's 90, the opposite has to be 90.
And,
And these two have to be 90. So it has to be a parallelogram. I mean, it has to be a rectangle. Also, if two consecutive sides of a parallelogram, consecutive means one right next to the other, or congruent, it's a rhombus. Because opposite sides of a parallelogram are congruent, aren't they? So if the two right next to each other are equal, then so do the others.
That means it's a square.
So you have not necessarily, all you know is you have 4 equal sides.
It's a rectangle.
You have a rhombus.
And a rectangle.
No,
Rectangle sides are not
a rhombus. Rectangle's got 4 equal angles. You don't know if there's 4 equal angles. All you know is there's 4 equal sides. All right, so what we've got to do is think about when they're asking us a question about a rhombus or a rectangle or whatever, before you even try to answer the question, you need to think, what are the characteristics of this thing? Okay? And then you need to think about what the question is that's being asked. So turn to page 186, and let's look at the classroom exercises.
Are you going to record this?
Yes, I am. All right, now on page 186, which they'll just have to listen and follow along with your book at home. Classroom exercises, you have 12 shapes, numbered 1 through 12. And we're asking for specifics about those 12 shapes, okay? We're going to classify which one of them are parallelograms, rectangles, rhombuses, and squares. And we're going to name which ones apply. Okay, so first they're saying which ones are a parallelogram. So someone tell me, what are the characteristics of a parallelogram?
The size.
Jacob?
Opposite angles are congruent.
Opposite angles are congruent.
Opposite sides are parallel.
Opposite sides are parallel and congruent. Okay? Well, it says appears to be. Okay, so we're looking at what appears to be. All right,
We're not making an assumption.
I can do this one.
but it tells us to. So if it tells us to, that's okay. All right, what's the first one you see?
1,
2, 4.
1, 2.
Let's do this instead. Which ones would not be parallelograms?
3, 6,
6,
And 11.
11.
Yeah, that's it.
And that's it.
11.
3, 6, and 11. Okay?
86.
Those would not be parallelograms. All the rest of them appear to be parallelograms. Okay, now if we say which ones are rectangles, we need to think, what makes something a rectangle?
Equal angles.
It's got 4 90-degree angles.
4,
2, 4.
2, 4,
8,
8,
9,
and 9, and 10.
8.
Okay?
No, not 10. Just 10.
So, I see, Cressy, you skipped over 2 and said 4. That's because you're used to a rectangle being squished, or like 2 sides longer than the others. But if we're talking about the characteristics of a rectangle, all we have to say is 4 90-degree angles. Okay? Now we're asked to classify which ones are rhombuses. Think about what's a rhombus.
They're all squares or rectangles.
4 equal sides. So what would be rhombuses?
2.
Number 1 is not a rhombus.
2.
2,
5,
5,
9,
not 7,
9. And 12.
9,
12.
and 12. Why not 7?
Because it's not
Because the
equal
sides aren't equal.
Sides aren't all equal. Okay?
Oh, my bad.
So you got to think about the class. What qualifies it as a rhombus? Okay, now, and then D says, all right, what about a square? Now, what's a square?
2.
4 90-degree angles and 4 equal sides. So number 2
9.
Number 9.
and number 9. Notice, Notice, when we started with a parallelogram, that had the least number of criteria that makes it a parallelogram. And that's where we had the most number of shapes, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then when we ended with a square has the most criteria that qualifies it to be a square, and that's where we had the least number of shapes.
See.
All right? Okay. Number 2 says, name each figure that is both a rectangle and a rhombus. What is a rectangle?
4 90-degree angles.
4 90-degree angles. And what's a rhombus?
Square. 4 equal sides.
So what are we looking for?
Square.
We're looking for squares.
2.
4 congruent angles
Yes.
and 4 congruent sides. So we're looking for squares, basically. So number 2 and number 9. Number 3 says